were enjoying some of the music as you were tuning in with us this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to our Discover Wellness While at Home webinar series. For some of you, it might be the first one that you are attending, and for others, it might be your second or third. Today's program is our Declutter program. First of all, I would like to apologize if anybody had issues getting in today. We did send out our normal reminders, but it appears that there must have been some issue with our email reminder system, and we're working on that for our future. So hopefully everybody is getting on. So we might see people joining us kind of as we get started. I do want to post the link for the workbook. Don't feel like you need to print this off now, but if you want to save it, feel free. This will also be emailed to all the participants, but if you're interested, you can copy that link and put it in a tab on one of your browsers, and it will pull up a PDF for you for today's session. With that, I want to introduce myself and my colleague. My name's Chelsea Byers, and I am a family life educator. I serve Champaign, Ford, Iroquois, and Vermilion counties, and I would like to introduce my colleague, Molly. Molly, you're muted.
First mistake of the webinar. I'm sorry, everybody. I was talking to myself. Thank you, Chelsea. My name is Molly Hofer, and I am also a family life educator. I work up in the Cook County area. I cover Chicago and suburbs in Cook County in my position as educator.
All right, we do have a chat box. So there will be moments when we might bring your attention to answer a question, and you can throw it in the chat box. Or if you have any questions, you can throw those also in the chat box. If I'm talking, Molly will be monitoring the chat and vice versa. So just feel free to keep yourself muted, and you can just throw anything that you'd like to in the chat, and we will try to answer questions as we go. All right. A little bit about
what is the meeting password?
You're in.
Yeah, I'm in by phone, but I'd like to connect to Zoom, and it's asking for the meeting password, and I can't find anything in my email.
It's Discover.
Discover is the password?
Yes.
All right, I'll let my colleagues know as well. Thank you.
Sorry you're having issues. The Family Life team is in different parts of the state. Here is a map that kind of shows where we're all located. Carla's up in the northwest kind of part of the state. Tessa's in the western part of the state. Molly, as she said, is up in Cook County. I'm here in kind of east central area, and Sherry's just south of me. All right, today's program is Simplify Your Life by Decluttering, and I'm going to turn it over to Molly to get us started.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea. First off, we're going to start with a series of PowerPoint slides that have pictures or sayings on them. And I want you in your mind to think, can I relate to this picture? Can I relate to this scenario? Just to get us started. And the first you see here, can you relate to this picture? Now, perhaps you can. Perhaps you're thinking, well, sometimes I can relate depending on how busy our lives are. Our garage corner can get like this, or the basement can get like this. But generally, I try to keep it neater. Some of you might be thinking, it looks pretty organized to me. It looks like, you know, everything should be there, and it should be, you know, it's where I can find it. So it doesn't look like much clutter to me. It looks fairly organized. This tells us that clutter truly is relative to each individual, and clutter doesn't have to be a problem unless it, of course, infringes on somebody else's territory or environment. That can sometimes be a cause for conflict in families. So that's part of the reason why we're talking about this today, to talk about our own clutter, to talk about perhaps other areas of life that we want to organize. But this, can you relate? Yes or no? Maybe so. Let's go on to the next slide. How about this saying? I get more cleaning done in the 10 minutes before someone comes over than I do in a week. That can be very true for me sometimes, depending on how busy my life gets. But many of us, when we know someone is going to pop over, I bet many of us get up and at least put something away or do something to prepare the house for someone to come in. Next slide. I had to clean my house for 2 hours just to tell guests sorry for the mess. That is also true for me sometimes. Even when I feel like I've spent all day cleaning my house, I sometimes say this, which isn't probably the right thing to say, but I do feel this way sometimes, where I feel like, oh, my house isn't exactly the way I want it, but sorry for the mess. All right, next slide. How about this? Can you relate to paper clutter? Perhaps paper is your thing for clutter, is your main concern, is your main Achilles heel. It might be what gets the best of you most times when you're thinking about your clutter. We all have paper clutter. We know that we live in a world today where we can try to reduce the paper clutter as much as possible. We'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, before I go into the objectives, I want to make a couple of other statements I don't have slides for, but I want you to think about this as far as how you relate to these statements. Can you or can you not? How about this one? I'm afraid I'll need something right after I get rid of it. Or, I can never find anything after I put it away. Or, how about this one? I repurchase items because I can't find them. As for me and my house, I think my house eats nail clippers. So if I were to think of that statement, I have to repurchase things because I can't find them. Nail clippers would be my problem. How about this? I can't get rid of it because it's special to me, or it's sentimental, or it just touches my heart. I don't want to get rid of it. Now, we're not here to tell you to get rid of things that are sentimental to you or that you want to keep, of course. We are here today to talk about life organization, perhaps dealing with some of the clutter that causes us to have stress or anxiety. And how about this one? I want less clutter, but I just can't figure out how to get started. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about how to get started, and it's a perfect time frame. We think in terms of spring cleaning, or we think in terms of getting the house ready for the summer. We think in terms of all these things. So this is a perfect time for this kind of a topic. And in our current environment, this might be a perfect time to be thinking about this while we are staying at home these days. So our objectives for today, we're going to talk about our own reasons for clutter. And I will present to you some of the common clutter causes that people have or people can relate to. But I want you to think about your own reasons too, and see if you have other reasons that don't really fit the picture of what we're talking about. We're going to talk about how clutter can cause stress in our lives and our relationships. We definitely will talk about the benefits of dealing with clutter, learning how to start, how to make a plan for taking care of the clutter in our households. Now, no one goes through life without accumulating stuff. Too much stuff contributes to clutter and disorganization. Sometimes you might feel like you have it more together than other times. Sometimes you might feel like you have more clutter than at other times. Perhaps you've had a recent downsizing, or you've downsized and you feel much more efficient and much more clutter-free. But you know, we typically accumulate stuff over time anyway. So it's always good to revisit our situations of clutter and try to take care of it and stay on the ball. Sometimes our stuff does get the best of us, and it can be a cause for stress in our lives, and it can be a cause of stress in other people's lives. So having a realistic plan does help. When we think in terms of clutter as a definition, a dictionary definition is right here on the screen: a disordered heap or a mass of objects, or a generalized state of disorder. Chelsea and I try to think in terms of clutter in relation to these questions. If you have an accumulation of items that you no longer use or care for, you might think in terms of, well, is this cluttering up my house? Do you have things that you don't really even like and you don't really even use? Do you have things in your possession that you have no place to store them, or you have no idea where to put them, and the item or items keep getting moved from one place to another? Do you have things that are broken and are in need of repair, or projects that need finishing and they've been needing this for quite a while? If you've answered, yes, I do have some of these, or if your answer is no to, I don't even like it, I don't use it, it doesn't have a home, perhaps those are definitions of clutter for you. Okay, next slide. When clutter is so voluminous that it disrupts your daily life or it's dangerous, that might be a hoarding situation. And we're not talking about that at all today. We're not talking about hoarding. That is a medical condition that may require the help of a professional. So we are only today talking about clutter, our everyday clutter, day in and day out, that we need to pick up and take care of. So in looking at this photo, again, I want you to have a mental impression of this photo. And in your mind, just think to yourself, yes, this is cluttered. No, this is not cluttered. Is it cluttered? Is it not? Let's say this desk was in your home. So for you personally, would you see this as a cluttered scene, a cluttered scenario, or would you be okay with it? Okay, you can answer in the chat box. You don't have to. You can answer just to yourself. It's really a rhetorical question, but if you'd like to answer, absolutely go ahead in the chat box. How about the next slide, Shells? How about this slide? This is a kitchen. It's the first and last kitchen I've ever seen that has a pegboard in the kitchen with things hanging off of it. I think it's kind of a cool and unique idea. Some of you might be thinking, oh, this is way too much. This is definitely cluttered. There's no way I could operate in this kitchen. It's not for me. Some of you might be thinking, it's busy, but I like it. It's a little, it's colorful. The pot holders are close. I could get to them. I could get to the pans. So neither scenario presents a fire hazard per se. Neither is a health or safety risk, but still may be deemed cluttered for some and not for others. All right, so now let's go into causes for clutter. These are common causes. I want you to be thinking about your own situations. Is this a cause for me? Is this not a cause for me? Some will be yes, some will be no. And I also want you to be thinking about your own clutter causes as we talk about these. The first is what clutter? What is clutter or cluttered to one person may not be to another. Just as I just showed you those two pictures, what is the definition of one may not be for the other. You may have heard someone say in the past, or you may have said it yourself, well, I know it looks cluttered, but I know where to find everything. I know it looks cluttered to you, but I know where everything is. Or you might have heard someone say, well, this is my stuff. You worry about your stuff. Have sayings for this. It might be a potential for conflict when clutter bothers one person and not the other. In a household, we know that that can be a cause for stress at times. As far as mind and body, that we're talking about both the physical body, and our emotional well-being. Now, when we think in terms of physical, a cause for clutter might be that a person is simply unable to complete tasks alone, maybe not able physically to get to the clutter. A person might not be able to step on a stepladder anymore to get to the upper part of the closet that she wants to declutter or fix. A person may not be able to complete tasks alone and requires the help of someone else to help with the clutter. As far as emotional, we talk about emotional causes for clutter in 3 different ways. First, life stressors can cause us to have emotional exhaustion. Life stressors can cause a cluttered mind, where you simply may not have the emotional energy to deal with your clutter. Life stressors can hinder our productivity. So in thinking of what's going on in the world around us today, There may never have been a time for more time on our hands than today. Some of you certainly might be even busier than you've ever been. But for the most part, we are spending time at home now, and we may think, oh, I could get on this project and I can get on that project. But we need to also keep in mind that life stressors can also hinder our productivity. So we need to find that balance or work in a way that when we are feeling up to it, that we should take that opportunity when we can, if this is something that we want to accomplish. Another emotional cause for clutter is the clutter itself may cause strong emotions. We may be dealing with items that belong to someone who has died, for instance, and just the fact that we have to deal with our emotions as we deal with the clutter is an emotional cause for the clutter, is a reason why we may keep putting it off, because of the emotions involved in dealing with items or things. And then the third emotional cause for clutter is that we may have emotional attachment to objects, as I started in the beginning talking about being sentimental about things. So we may hang on to something for sentimental reasons and may not be ready to give it up. And what is sentimental to you and not sentimental to other, we know is also relative, isn't it? So you may live with someone who says, oh, why are you hanging on to that? You don't need that, when you may be emotionally attached to something, which is, again, these are only causes for clutter. We're not to get rid of something or not to get rid of something. We're just saying these are reasons why we may not have space, or we may have things that are disorganized. Other ones, it comes with the job. Sometimes we have work-life runoff, and it may be a cause for clutter at home. Even after work life ends, there are sometimes people that will bring their work life home, and they may not even look at it again, but the things were important to them at the time, and they wanted to bring them home so that they had time to look at them, and then they get stored in the garage. I worked with a colleague who, when she retired, she actually rented a pull behind her car U-Haul to take home some of her important papers that she, of course, was very attached to. And to this day, I wonder if she utilized some of those papers again once she retired. So with this ring, you may be married to a clutterer, or you may have a partner who's a clutterer, for better or worse, in all your clutter. I myself have, my husband is a collector of sports memorabilia, and I wouldn't exactly call it clutter because it's important to him and it's important to me, and some of it is valuable, but when it doesn't get stored properly, I do deem it as clutter. Okay, next slide, Chels. How about this? All in the family is another cause. There are well-intentioned family members who leave their things behind with the idea that they will come back someday and pick those things up. Mom, when I get a bigger place, I'll come by and get those boxes that are in the attic, or could you hang on to those for just a little while longer? I'm not ready to pick those up yet. Sometimes the word temporarily, can you store it temporarily? I always think with my own son might be code for forever. So that can also be a clutter cause. Someday. How about those supplies needed for a someday project? I'm gonna make a quilt someday. So here are all of my fabric pieces. You can tell I'm not a quilt maker, by the way. I don't know how to talk about them, but the squares or the swatches or the pieces. You sometimes store things away for those someday projects, and in the process of storing them away, they may get damaged. They may lose their appeal for you. Sometimes projects can even go out of style as you wait for someday. How about this someday? You might need it someday. I'm going to put that away because I might have to use that someday. And sometimes that does help. I know I wish that I put my stereo away for someday, my turntable, because my son wanted one just a few years ago, and now they are so much more expensive than they were when I was a kid. So sometimes that does come true and you do need it someday, but someday is also just a day of the week, or not a day of the week. Someday may never come and you may never use it. Can't have too many. If an item is replaced and the old item is not thrown away because it still works, because it still fits, because it's still good, it's still useful, that can also be a cause for clutter. I know my mom, she's been gone a while now, but she loved having a coffee pot that had the hottest coffee ever. And she was alive in the days where we still had the burners, you know, the coffee makers with the burners. And I know they still exist today, but now we have those carafes. But when her burner started to be the least bit ineffective, she would want a new coffee pot, to the point where one day I went out into their garage and she had 2 other coffee pots on the workbench in the garage. And I said, Mom, why are you keeping these? And she said, well, you never know. If this goes out, I might need to use that in a pinch. So having too many things can be a cause for clutter. Busy as a bee. We are busy people. We lead busy lives. The clutter can build because we have the mentality, oh, someday I'm going to get to that, or I'm just too busy right now, I'll get to it someday soon. So we're busy. That's another cause for clutter. And lastly, as far as causes, in and out. When more goes into a house, or comes into a house rather than goes out, that can be a cause for clutter. Limited purchases equals limited clutter. Now, are there any other causes for clutter that you have in mind that you think, well, you said all of these, but this is a cause for me? Just open it up for just about 20 seconds to anyone who wants to put anything in the chat box. Any other clutter causes for you personally that I did not say? I like Rebecca says her husband has 2 containers full of random cables and cords. It drives her crazy. I can relate to that, Rebecca, for sure. Not enough storage space, absolutely. Too many hobbies. Being a teacher, enough said with that. Limited storage, ineffective storage, limited space to put things right. I have always said someday, and now someday is here and I have time, but cannot get motivated to declutter. I can understand that for sure. Okay, I'm looking at all of the others. Thank you very much. Totes and totes for an upcoming garage sale. I have been there, done that too. So these are your clutter causes. So I want you to think about that as we go through the rest of the program. Now we're going to have a little bit of a mental scavenger hunt. Next slide, Chelsea. In your mind's eye, I am going to list out loud 10 household items. You don't have to put it in the chat box, but to yourself, I want you to think, yes, I have this item and I know exactly where it is. If you don't have the item, of course, disregard that item, but I'm going to mention 10 household items. And the whole point is, how organized are you? I want to know if you know exactly where it is, exactly which drawer, exactly which cabinet, or if you kind of know where it is. All right, your first mental scavenger hunt item is the dreaded nail clipper that I mentioned a little while ago. Can you readily put your finger on your nail clipper? I'm not going to spend too much time on this, so you'll have to mentally go through fast. A Phillips screwdriver. Find that in your mind's eye. A safety pin. How about a tape measure? How about your car title? Thumbtacks. Your tax return from 2015. A flashlight. Your washing machine manual. And lastly, a 9-volt battery. Now, you might have been able to readily locate those items in your mind. Did you go right there and you could go right to the drawer, open up the kitchen drawer, look to the lower right, and there is the nail clipper, or there is the screwdriver? You might have had that scenario where you know exactly where things are. Someone wrote here, all but the thumbtacks. That's good. Some of you might be thinking, well, I know we have it. It's probably in one of 2 places. Or you might be thinking, I know we have it, but I have no idea where it is because it never gets put back in the right spot. Now, those items that you were able to locate in your mind's eye, were they in what universally might be deemed a proper place? Or for instance, was your nail clipper on the coffee table in the family room, where not everyone would keep it there, but you do? And if it works for you, I'm certainly not telling you to fix it, but the whole reason for this scavenger hunt is for us to consider this next rhetorical question. Can you see where your toothbrush is right now in your mind's eye? And universally, I know everyone will say yes, 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 yes. So how does knowing where your toothbrush is differ from the other items I've asked you about? Again, rhetorical. Your toothbrush has a consistent location, right? You use your toothbrush once, twice, 3 times a day, and you put it back as soon as you're finished with it, typically. You always put your toothbrush back in the same place. You always, or your toothbrushes are typically housed together with other toothbrushes if you share the same space. And everyone in the family typically is in agreement about where a toothbrush goes. So if I was at your house right now, I could probably find your toothbrush faster than, let's say, your thumbtack, or let's say your washing machine manual. The organizing principles used to store your toothbrush can be used to store anything if you think about it. We've all heard that old adage or old saying, a place for everything and everything in its place. There should be and could be one place for your silverware, one place for your tax returns, one place for your socks, one place for your glassware. So with that organizing principle in mind, I want you to think about that as we go on and talk about how to declutter, okay? But before I turn it over to Chelsea, I'm going to talk about how managing our clutter can save us time, money, it can enhance our health, it can improve our emotional state, and promote healthy relationships. Because we can be stressed by our clutter, so managing it really does help us to de-stress. As far as saving time, if I asked you when was the last time you spent time looking for something, it probably wasn't that long ago, because you're human. We do pick things up and then forget where we've placed them. Remote control, glasses, our keys, our shoes, our slippers, all of those things are, oh, where did I take that off? That happens to all of us. So we do spend time looking for things. Imagine if you spent on average 10 minutes a day looking for something. That equals more than 60 minutes in a week, which equals more than 60 hours in a year, which is about 2.5 days of time spent looking for things. Now, think about what you could do with 2.5 extra days. That is actually an extra weekend in your life. So managing our clutter can certainly save us time. As far as saving us money, I facetiously referred to a minute ago, when you can't find something, you perhaps buy another, when I was reading those statements out loud. You may have had the surprise also of finding something that you didn't even know you had, and now you have 2 of those items because you did have to go and buy something. In some cases, we have too much stuff. I know that some of you put in the chat box, no room to put things. So sometimes we accumulate so much stuff that what do? We end up paying money for a storage unit to save and store some of our things. And that, of course, costs us money, right? So decluttering can help us save money. As far as enhancing our social or our health and safety, I was trying to read the chat box and read the slide at the same time, so there's my stall. Sorry about that. As far as enhancing our health and safety, clutter can indeed be a fire hazard. If something is stored too close to a heat source, we know that's a major no-no, but sometimes it can be a cause for a fire hazard. Or if there is something stored in, let's say, a basement that gets water or is damp and moist and kind of dank anyway, that can be a perfect place for mold to thrive. And we know that dust and mold are certainly common culprits for respiratory problems. So Clutter can be a health and safety hazard. Even tripping over things can be a problem. As far as emotional well-being, I want you to listen to this statement. I'm going to say it twice. A cluttered room is a constant reminder that there is more to do, and that distracts us from focusing on what needs to get done. A cluttered room is a constant reminder that there is more to do, and that distracts us from focusing on what needs to get done. If you're like me, sometimes when I have something on my mind, I lay in bed and think about it, and sometimes it is a room that I want to organize better or a room that I need to go through and clean out. Now think about the opposite of that. Once you have decluttered and really organized a space, isn't it just lovely to stand there and look at it and admire your handiwork, that you're proud of what you did and it really looks wonderful and inviting? So our emotional well-being is certainly hampered when we have clutter for some of us. And when we do take care of it, it is also really enhanced. And as far as healthy relationships, some of you might be thinking, well, I wouldn't have too many clutter problems if it weren't for some of the people that I love who live with me. Or you might be thinking, if the rest of the people in the house would pick up their own things, we would have less clutter. So we know that clutter can be a source of arguments. It can be a source of anxiety. Sometimes clutter may keep family and friends from visiting. An adult child may be worried about visiting mom or dad, grandma or grandpa, if their homes are cluttered or may have things out that are not safe for children. So it can hamper our relationships as far as clutter is concerned. So I am now going to turn it over to Chelsea, and she will take us through how to take care of and deal with our clutter.
All right, thanks Molly for getting us started. All right, in the chat box, I want you to put how the picture on the left makes you feel. So what feeling words would you use to describe the feeling you get if you were in the room on the left, the bathroom on the left? Anxious, stressed, frustrated, closed in, gross, anxious, stressed, messy, overwhelmed, anxious. All right, now let's go put ourselves in the bathroom on the right. How are you feeling if you were standing in the bathroom on the right? Calm, peaceful, relaxed, proud, clean, bored, beautiful. Yeah, sometimes the things are too clean, right? Or too sparse. All right, thank you everybody. We put this in here just to help you guys think about environments really do affect our feelings, how we feel about space, right? Have you ever cleaned a closet, your car, maybe your garage, and thought, you know, I'm never going to let it get that bad again? And you feel so proud about how good it looked. And then what happens? Does anybody want to tell me what happens in the chat box? Does it ever get messy again? Absolutely, right? Life happens. If you work for extension, I always say, oh, my car is always messy. It happens because we're human, right? Before we look at some ways to clear up our clutter, we're gonna start by identifying areas that we all want to address. So if you have any kind of paper around you, I would like you to think about areas in your home where your clutter kind of gathers, all right? So, you know, if you were to attack something right away, what first pops into your mind? So write that down on a piece of paper. You can write it in the chat box if you'd like, but it'd also be good for you to have it yourself on a sheet of paper where you're at. Okay, I'm seeing flat surfaces, offices, dining room, basement, utility room, bedrooms, junk room. All right. So when you think about these areas, I want you to be more specific now and think about in that space, is there a certain area? So somebody said flat surfaces. That was a pretty good one. So somebody put kitchen table. Yeah. Is there a certain area? So if it's in a certain room, is there a certain area? Is it a junk drawer? Is it, you know, the end of the kitchen table that you don't use? Is it a spare room that you can just close the door and nobody has to see? If you have a basement, you know, if you just put it all down there in the basement, you leave it. Because what we need to do when we think about attacking our clutter is thinking about, the space, where it is, and then how we're going to attack that clutter. And also, sometimes it's more than just physical space. Sometimes it's digital space, right? So emails, digital files, things like that. So as we talk about these things, as we move forward, make yourself a list of things that you might want to work on, and you're kind of creating an action plan. All right. So when we think of these areas, it might cause you some anxiety and stress, but hopefully at the end of this, you will feel a little bit better about it. So I don't want you to think that this is super stressful, all right? So when you first start, you think, okay, where am I going to begin? There's no right or wrong way. There's different ways to attack this. For some people, they want to attack the area that causes the most anxiety and then move to their next priority area. Some people are more systematic and they like to attack things room by room. So, starting in one room and hitting all the spaces before they move on to that next space. So that's one way to think about it. As you go through these rooms or areas, how do you go through your items? Well, we have some suggestions for you. We think that you should have maybe like 4 buckets or bins or laundry baskets, and have one, it's a trash can to throw it away. One that's the basket of things that are going to get out of the house. You're going to donate it, you're going to sell it, you're going to recycle it. One is a basket of things that you're going to put back. It's just items that are not in their right location. And then there's this one basket or bin to be determined. How many of us get stuck on those to be determined items? You're like, I don't know. Do I want to get rid of it? Do I want to keep it? I don't know what to do with this item, right? And so the reason you get this basket to hold these to be determined items is because you don't want to get stuck on an item, because that's going to halt your, production, your movement forward. So if you don't know, don't spend time on it. Put it in the to be determined, basket and keep moving. Because I think somebody in the chat box had said when they're cleaning their garage, they find an item and then they stop, right? And that happens to all of us. So, we want to think about these items as we're moving forward. So think about it by having like 4 containers, throw away, that recycle, donate, sell. I would kind of put those all together because those are things that are going to be moving out of your house. And then a basket of things that need to go back to their rightful place in your home, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then a good way is to set a timer. A lot of times, it's just too hard to get started and people are like, oh, I just can't tackle this whole basement, or I can't tackle the whole spare room. But if you just say, you know what, I'm going to work on this for 20 minutes, or I'm going to do this for, 1 hour, then it becomes a more manageable task. So, that's something to think about when you're trying to move forward on things. Also think about, when you're working with that basket, make one trip through the house with that basket to put all the items away. So, when you're cleaning a space, don't be like, oh, here's an item, I need to go run this upstairs, or I need to go run this to my bedroom. Because what happens when you run to another room? Anybody want to throw something in the chat box? What happens if you leave the space you're working at? You find something else to do. Exactly. So it's really good to have like one space where you just throw everything in that basket, because if you walk out of that space, you're going to get sidetracked, right? So it's good to have one trip, one basket when you go put all those items away at one time. All right, so we talked about that to be determined basket, right? So these are some questions that we suggest you ask when you're looking at items that you just don't know what to do with. So maybe you're looking at that item and you're saying, when was the last time I used this? And Molly said her mom had multiple coffee pots, which I think is funny. We have a little coffee pot here. How often do I use it? Where do I use it? Do I have more than one of them? And do I need more than one of them? So think about that. Oftentimes we get a newer version of something, and what do? We store the old one because we're like, oh, well, if this one breaks, we'll go back to the old one. Well, there was a reason we probably got a newer version, it's because the old one doesn't work as well. It doesn't get as hot. If it's a curling iron for me, it doesn't clamp as tight, or there's some reason we got a newer one. So really, are we going back to that old one? So where do I use it? This is a reason why a lot of times things are not put away, because we store them in spaces that aren't close to where we use them. So my best friend's mom always did her ironing in her living or her family room where she watched TV. So if you have space to store an iron and an ironing board where you actually do your ironing, I suggest you store it close to where you physically do it. Otherwise, what happens? Those items don't actually get put back away because they're not nearby. So if you can store an item close to where you use it, like Molly used the toothbrush analogy, then that's a better thing to think about. So if you ever find something that's always out and not near where it's stored, then think about if there's a closer place where you can store it so it does get put away. And we found this with tools in our house. So we actually have a set of screwdrivers in a office desk. So they're not always just left out. So we have a set in our garage. We have an extra set in an office desk, because otherwise what happens? They don't ever make it back to the garage. So that's something to think about. Here's some more questions to think about. Is it usable? Yes. Then am I ever going to use it again? If it's not usable, then why am I holding on to it? It's just becoming clutter, right? If I didn't have this item, would it impact my life? And that's one of those things where we kind of hold on to things, but are we really using them? But better yet, could somebody else use it if it's usable? And this is one of those things where gifting is a great way to get rid of items. You can see others use the item, enjoy the item. This is the best way to get rid of things. It's just to gift them to a friend, a family member, somebody who could use it and enjoy it, instead of you storing it, it going bad, it not getting used, those kind of things. So now we're going to look at some other things to think about. When you're trying to attack these areas, sometimes it's good to just choose one specific small area. So if you're looking at a bookshelf, maybe you're just going to do one shelf, or not the whole bookshelf or storage space, just one shelf. Like, that's manageable. Pick up as many things as possible before your timer is done. That whole idea of setting a timer and just doing the 20 minutes or whatever it is, and then put items in the correct container, right? So figure out where items go and get them back to their home. Some other tips is storing similar items together. If you have a whole bunch of art supplies, are they in multiple places, or can you put them all in one location? Molly mentioned, having too many of things. So have that idea of, as you take things in, toss something out. My husband would love for me to have this theory with clothes, but I haven't quite gotten there. Get all your papers in one place. A lot of times papers, can become overwhelming, right? In mail, oftentimes we suggest people to deal with your mail one time. If it's junk mail and you're throwing it away, throw it away as soon as you identify it as junk mail. Don't set it on a counter and let it pile. Touch it once, right? In the handout, we do have ways to reduce the amount of paper and phone calls you get. So in the handout, there's some ways to opt out of catalogs, junk mail, do not call lists, those kind of things. So in the handout, you can get those. Also, simplify your gadgets. This one, think about all the things we have in our kitchens. We have things that mix and blend and chop and cut, and do we need all of these different kinds of gadgets, or does one gadget really do a lot of these things? So think about that when it comes to things that you have in your garage, things in your kitchen, and kind of go through your house with that mindset. Do I really need all of these gadgets, or can I simplify my gadgets? When we look at keepsake clutter, this one is one that people talk about a lot. This is one of those harder things to go through because it's sentimental. It has a sentimental value to people. So whether it be something from a loved one, who has passed, or maybe it's from the children that are raised and grown up, right? But think about ways that you want to display the items. If it's something that you've decided that you want to keep, then should you display them in a way? Are you going to store something that's important to you in just a paper box in the attic? Is that going to really keep it nice for long term? Or does it need to be stored properly? So think about items that you're keeping and how you're storing them. My mom was a teacher. She retired, and she had all these teacher, bulletin board paraphernalia, the little edgings and the little cutouts that you can make all these bulletin boards with. And when she retired, she was like, oh, I should give these to somebody. But she was a principal for 25 years after she was a teacher. And we started going through some of them, and we're like, well, these are pretty dated. So we really weren't sure if anybody would really want them, but she offered them to people, that gifting. And then we, got rid of the rest of them. But, it was one of those things that she had them all stored up in an attic, and they were kind of stored not in the best way. So a lot of them were just kind of trashed anyway after being stored for 25 years. So it's something that you want to think about keeping and keeping good. Think about how you're storing it, right? Again, I mentioned earlier, gifting in your lifetime so you can see somebody else enjoy it. Downsize your collections. Sometimes when we teach this, I had somebody say that they had inherited a collection of beer steins because their father was served in Germany during World War II, and they really weren't something that they had wanted. So what they did is they kept one as a memory of their, father, and then they, got rid of the rest of them. They sold the rest of them. So, maybe it's keeping one for the memory, but not keeping the entire collection. So that's something that you could think about doing, or taking a picture of them to preserve the memory, and having the pictures of the collection, and then moving the collection on if they don't mean anything to you. So that's one way to use the technology, or repurpose, and organize your photos. Photos, I think, is another big one that people talk about. How many of us have boxes of photos that we need to organize or we have plans for? And now so many of us have all these digital photos that we need to do something with, whether it's we have plans to make digital or to make the picture books, or, we have great plans and ideas of scrapbooking or something, but we haven't done it yet. So maybe there's something that we want to do, with these keepsakes that we have plans for. So think about that if that's on your to-do list. I'm going to check the chat box real quick. It says, just don't gift to your kids who also need to declutter. I find it easier to give my stuff to kids, but have tried to keep in my mind if they really need any of the stuff. Yep, that's a great point. Sometimes it's just passing on the clutter, right? There's lots of people. I think that sometimes kids who go away to college are a great group of people who could use things when it comes to household items like dishes and pots and pans, and they don't have a lot of money, but they're setting up apartments for the first time. So a lot of times those are good people to gift items to.
Chels, can I interject for 1 second?
Absolutely.
It's actually a plug. Teresa mentioned exactly what you just read, that she has to think about her kids and the things they already have. Next Thursday, Chelsea and I are presenting Who Gets Grandma's Pie Plate? Yellow Pie Plate is the exact title. And this is a program that comes to us from University of Minnesota Extension. And it is kind of a secondary part to this. It's about the transfer of possessions and making a plan for the transfer of possessions, so that the things that you do cherish and want to make sure that they go on to others. We're going to have a talk about that next week. So that's just a mini plug. It's a perfect time for that little plug for next week.
Thank you, Molly. I just threw some personal pictures in here to show you some items that I have saved, to show you ways of displaying things. The picnic basket up on the top shelf of this shelving unit was from my grandparents on my mom's side. They used to take picnics a lot when they were courting. And so I thought that was a cute story that I had never known about them until we were cleaning out my grandparents' home, farm home. And so, I don't know, it just grabbed me. So I thought but I didn't just grab it and just stick it in my basement. I put it out for display. The same goes for This owl on the top shelf is from my husband's grandparents. And so it actually used to hold liquor in it, I believe. It's a bottle, but it's a bottle in disguise. You can't tell it's a bottle. And then up on the right-hand side of this one, the globe is a cookie jar that was in my dad's parents' home. We would growing up seeing my grandparents on my dad's side, they always had cookies in that jar. And so I love that globe. And so that's for my grandparents on my dad's side. So those are just things from my grandparents' homes that are in my home now, proudly displayed. And then this is something new that we put in our house. My husband and I met playing softball, and 3 of these bats are from my grandma's house. My grandma was a softball player. Actually, she was a baseball player. And then the top bat is my husband's grandpa was a woodworker, so the top bat he made. 2 of the bats are from my bats from growing up playing softball. And then 1 bat was a wedding gift that has our wedding date engraved on it. And so we made a display of all these bats as a collection. And so, yeah, so we decided to make this as a display wall in our house. And so instead of just storing them, we decided to display them. So those are just some things to think about. And now we're going to wrap up with just some things. Once you clean up your space, how do you keep it clean, right? So here are just a couple upkeep strategies. One is called the spurt strategy. It takes just 5 to 15 minutes each day to pick up and put away anything that you've got out. So take advantage of that free time that you have just before a favorite show or just before bed. And just go through the house and tidy up a little bit, right? If you maintain the cleanliness, then you can kind of stay on top of it. We have one called prompt put away. If something just takes a couple minutes, just do it, right? Hanging up your coat when you come in, just putting away some dishes, throwing your key on a hook, folding up a blanket after you used it on the couch, hanging up clothes or putting away your clothes. Those are things that can pile up and they can kind of add up if all the things are kind of in a disarray. But they just take a couple minutes when you really think about it, right? The next thing is the Castaway Container. This is one that my friend Bethany does a great job at. She puts some baskets or bags in her closet, and she comes across something in her closet or her drawers that she no longer uses. She doesn't have feelings that she wants to keep it at all. She throws it right away in that container, right? So if you're going to donate it or resale it, then just have like 2 bags, and then you pull something out of your closet and you're like, you know what, I do not wear this. Throw it right away in that bag. Once those bags are full, move those out of your house. That kind of just helps you keep on top of those things, right? It just helps you kind of take care of some of those clutter issues. And then the good riddance routine. So this one is kind of that regular maintenance. This will lessen the chance that clutter can build. It means just taking a thorough look at your clutter clusters regularly. So if you know that flat surface in your kitchen is that place that gets you, really be mindful of that. Or if it's, a spare room, try to be mindful of that space and really check in on those areas. So we hope you have thought about some spaces in your house that you want to work on. It's good for you to kind of have goals. So, if you just set a little bit of an action plan for yourself and think, you know what, this is the first thing that I want to tackle, we would encourage you to do that. So you're intentional about that. There are great benefits to decluttering. If you give away items, you can see others enjoy those items. Decluttering will make downsizing later much easier. You'll know what you have and not need to waste money on buying duplicates. That's a wonderful thing. My husband and I, when we went through this, staying at home, shelter in place, we went through our freezer and we itemized all the things in our freezer. We're like, hey, we actually have a lot of things in our freezer we can live off of for a while. You can make money by selling your stuff. If you have duplicates of things that you don't need, whether it be things in your garage or a spare room or your clothes, you can sell items and you can donate items and get tax write-offs. So there's lots of things that you can do to move things out of your house and ways to, declutter your spaces. For those of you who mentioned paper, I do want to share a website. I'm going to put it in the chat box, so if you want to copy it. Our consumer team has a wonderful website called Dealing with Clutter, and they have information on there about paperwork, how long you need to keep important documents, you know, storage that works, a home for every item, financial and tax records, those kind of things. And so that would be a great link to go to for additional information on keeping track of paper. Also, I would like to throw in a link for our webinar today. I'm going to throw in a link for the evaluation as well as for the handout again.
Could you also throw in, Chelsea, the webinar for next week, the registration? Someone asked for that. If you
I will. I want to open it up for questions, and I see people are making notes. Molly, can you read the chat box for people who are on the phone?
Yes, one of the questions was a place for everything and everything in its place. When I referenced the toothbrushes, how do you get everyone to agree on a place where something should be kept? And one person answered, I think the person, is it Anu Murphy, said, I think the person or persons who use the item the most should decide where it goes. I think that's a great suggestion. I also think it's good to think about involving everyone in the process, really just saying, let's talk about this. We all use this. We're all always looking for it because nobody ever puts it back in the same place. So let's think in terms of what would be the best place and maybe talk about it together as a family in the household and see if you can come to some sort of consensus and then really hold each other accountable in trying to stick with it. Let me look and see some of the other. If you have any questions, you can also throw them in the chat box.
I'm trying to figure out why the evaluation doesn't come up as a link to click. Anyway, I guess it's working. Okay. Other questions everybody has?
One said, who is taking donations these days? And I know we're in a, I can't really answer that right now because I know donations have stopped many places and people on the call are really from all over. But generally speaking, most people know where, you know, where there are locations for donations in their areas, whether it's religious organizations or, you know, Goodwill, AMVETS, other Red Cross, other types of donations. Even animal shelters will take towels and blankets and that kind of thing. And I know we're in a bit of a temporary situation here, but while you are decluttering, you can really ask around and look into that for when you are ready to make those donations.
Yeah, and our handout also has information for stuff for Illinois, as well as other places to think about. So things that are more national, such as AMVETS, you know, habitat restores, places that can be found in a variety of places. AMVETS a lot of times comes around and picks them up, but there's websites to look on the handout, Salvation Armies, Catholic Charities, Goodwills, a variety of places, Soul for Souls for gently worn shoes. So the handout has a lot of places that to sell, recycle, or donate your items. Some of them also have places to recycle electronics, which is a lot of times a hard thing to find. It also has some links to reduce the amount of your junk mail, like I mentioned earlier. So those are some, it has a page and a half of resources of places to maybe get you thinking to look locally. So
another thing that I wanted to mention that we didn't mention, and we typically do as far as additional tips, if you are a garage seller or if you do like freebies at health fairs or you like souvenirs, take a good look at your own personal behaviors and your own personal preferences. And if you like those things and enjoy those things in your home, great, absolutely. But if you find that those things are part of your clutter, maybe you can do less of that, maybe less garage selling, or don't sign up for sweepstakes because then your email is bombarded or your other mail is bombarded, your name and address gets sold, and then all of a sudden you're receiving catalogs and other things. So take a look at your own personal behaviors. If you can borrow something or rent something as opposed to purchasing it, like, of course, library books as an example. And when you do store things away, if you have totes that you put them in, if you can find totes that you can see, even if it's an opaque tote, you can kind of see what's in there. And that might help you in the long run to, if you have totes that are stacked on top of each other, to be able to at least have an inkling of what's in there, or to label your stuff.
Label them. And if you can, try to find totes that are similar so that they stack nicely.
Exactly.
That's a good way to store things as well.
My last tip that I'll say, and then I'll be quiet, if paper is your thing, try to put all of your information in one place. Maybe purchase one steno notebook or one notebook for all of your note-taking and reminders and that kind of thing, because then that does lessen your paper here, there, and everywhere. Or, I have to hang this on the fridge now so I don't lose it. If you have everything in one notebook, that really makes things tidier paper-wise.
And you also brought up another, I thought, Molly, sometimes we have spaces like fridges that collect a lot of stuff that we put on the fridge with magnets, or we have a bulletin board that gets overrun. So think about decluttering those spaces as well. Have maybe every so often you revisit those areas. If you collect coupons, go through those and get rid of the ones that are expired. What's up there, is it the school calendar from last year? What's up there that, can be pitched or recycled, those kind of things. I also want to bring your attention, we are in the middle of a nutrition, wellness, and the brain series. If that's something that's of interest to you, next week we're going to talk about physical activity and children, and then the next week is nutrition and adulthood, and then the last week is nutrition and older adults, and how nutrition plays an important part with the brain. So that series, you can sign up at goillinois.edu/lifespan wellness. And we also have a program called Extending Wellness, and it's a texting program where if you sign up for this, we'll send you 1 to 2 texts each week, and it's a little health nudge of some kind. So you might get information on healthy finances, healthy eating. It might be a recipe. It might be something on having healthy families. So if you're interested in that, to sign up, you go to goillinois.edu/wellness tips. Again, you'll never get more than 2 texts in a week. We will not share your phone numbers, and you can opt out at any time. So those are 2 other things that you can check out from U of I Extension. Are there any other questions? We will be sending out in a follow-up email a link to the handout and the evaluation. Again, we're sorry if anybody had trouble getting in today. We will follow up with emails. We had some kind of issue with our email system, so we do apologize with that.
We covered a lot in this hour, and we thank you very much for your time and attention and your comments. And we look forward to hearing from you again next week and several weeks after. We have all kinds of webinars coming up, so be on the lookout.
Yes, the password will be the same for next week. It's Discover. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for tuning into CUI's TV. We hope you enjoyed the show. This video can be accessed anytime on youtube.com. In the YouTube search bar, type in UPTV6 and look for their microphone logo. We hope you will join us again next week for more local, engaging content designed specifically for Champaign County older adults. Take care and stay safe.